So friends, I'm going to say something that I don't feel like we get to say often enough. Today was a really good day for the rule of law. Let's talk about that, because justice matters. Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So let's take on two big legal developments. Developments that are good for the rule of law, good for the people of New York, and good for the American people generally. The first development, the Trump Organization is guilty, convicted of 17 counts of various kinds of criminal fraud over the course of 15 years. The second big story is that the January 6th House Select Committee will make formal criminal referrals to the Department of Justice based on the evidence of crime they uncovered during their investigation into the attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, based on their investigation of the insurrection. Let's start with the Trump Organization story. This headline from CNN, Trump Organization found guilty on all counts of criminal tax fraud. And that article begins, a Manhattan jury has found two Trump Organization companies guilty on multiple charges of criminal tax fraud and falsifying business records connected to a 15-year scheme to defraud tax authorities by failing to report and pay taxes on compensation for top executives. So friends, what are some of the main takeaways from this guilty verdict? First of all, it looks like the Trump Organization is done. Put a fork in it. It's likely to go belly up. Why do I say that? Well, no reputable lending institutions are going to want to have anything to do with the Trump Organization now that the organization has been criminally convicted of 17 counts for basically running the business corruptly, fraudulently for a decade and a half. Not only will no reputable banks or lending institutions want to do business with Trump and his organization, but even the shadier institutions, maybe some of the overseas banks that had previously been willing to do business with Donald Trump, notwithstanding his abysmal credit rating, I suspect. Because they thought, well, maybe he'll help us out. Maybe this will buy us some influence, some access. He's a president or a former president. Well, now, I think even the less than reputable institutions will feel like we're not going to get our bang for the buck if we continue to lend to or invest in an organization that's been convicted of 17 counts of fraud. So it feels like the Trump Organization is pretty much done. Now, this conviction doesn't mean that New York state authorities get to come in and dismantle the Trump Organization. That's not part of the available punishment or sanctions as a result of these convictions. These convictions are more about monetary sanctions that will be imposed on the Trump Organization as a result of these convictions. What's another takeaway? Well, this will undoubtedly put wind in the sails of New York Attorney General Tish James' civil suit against not only the Trump Organization, but Donald Trump and his family members personally, because you'll recall, this is some additional reporting from CNN, Trump is also facing a $250 million civil suit from New York Attorney General Tish James, alleging he and his adult children were involved in a decade-long fraud. The Attorney General is seeking to permanently bar them from serving as an officer or director of a company in New York State, among other penalties. So it feels like this has certainly moved the ball in Tish James' civil suit against Trump and his adult children. The third takeaway is I believe this will breathe life into the criminal prosecution of Donald Trump in New York State, which has yet to be brought. He's not been indicted. He wasn't part of the Trump Organization trial that just concluded. But recall, in recent days, Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, who had previously killed an investigation into Donald Trump, was quoted as saying that basically he is reinvigorating the criminal investigation of Trump for any number of New York State crimes. And here is why I say this will breathe life into DA Bragg's criminal investigation of Trump. The prosecutors in the Trump Organization case late last week in their closing arguments told the jury the following. Prosecutor, evidence shows Trump explicitly okayed tax fraud. So if that's what the evidence just proved in the criminal case against the Trump Organization, that Donald Trump explicitly okayed tax fraud, well, then it feels like Donald Trump ought to be next batter up in a criminal prosecution in New York. Okay, friends, the second legal development. We learned today that the January 6th committee that has investigated the insurrection will make formal criminal referrals, presumably of Donald Trump and perhaps others, to the Department of Justice. Here is today's reporting on that story. From CNN, House January 6th committee has decided to make criminal referrals, chairman says. The House Select Committee investigating the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol has decided to make criminal referrals to the Department of Justice, the panel's chairman, Representative Bennie Thompson, told reporters Tuesday. Thompson, a Mississippi Democrat, said the committee has not narrowed down the universe of individuals who may be referred for criminal investigation, referred for possible prosecution. Okay, so let's talk about criminal referrals. What are they? What do they accomplish? Now, first of all, just because Congress conducts an investigation, collects up a bunch of evidence that tends to show people committed crimes against the United States, and they package it all up and they give it to the Department of Justice with a recommendation, a referral that these people ought to be prosecuted, that does not mean DOJ will prosecute those people. It's not binding. Maybe DOJ won't see it Congress's way. It's a suggestion. It's a recommendation. And DOJ is free to reject it. And DOJ prides itself, as it should, on making independent prosecutorial decisions, right? Unaffected by what outside forces or people or organizations or agencies or co-equal branches of government say DOJ should do. So they pride themselves on their independence. But when a co-equal branch of government conducts an exhaustive, extraordinary investigation on an attack against our very democracy that was organized, the date was set, and that was inspired by and incited by a sitting president of the United States, when they conduct that kind of investigation in an attempt to repair our democracy and prevent it from ever happening again, and they develop evidence that supports the conclusion that crimes against the United States have been committed, and they package that all up, the evidence, and they give it to DOJ with a recommendation that there be a prosecution, there be accountability for those crimes. That may only be a suggestion, but it is one hell of an important suggestion. So I'm quite confident DOJ will take it very seriously and then will go on to exercise their independent prosecutorial discretion. Now, remember, Congress has referred people for prosecution before. They referred Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro for contempt of Congress, referred them for prosecution, and DOJ indicted them. Prosecuted Steve Bannon. DOJ is prosecuting Peter Navarro. But remember, Congress also referred for prosecution for contempt of Congress Mark Meadows and Dan Scavino. And DOJ, nothing. Crickets. No prosecutions of those two men for the crimes they inarguably committed. My hope, friends, is that Meadows and Scavino may ultimately be rolled into the larger conspiracy against the United States, a charge that I would bet $1. That's my betting limit. I'm not a high roller, but I'd bet $1. That indictment is coming, a 371 conspiracy to defraud or commit offenses against the United States. And maybe that's where Meadows and Scavino will find their names on the cover page of an indictment as defendants. And here's a criminal referral that has always stuck in my craw. You may have forgotten this one, friends, maybe not. Back in 2019, a bipartisan committee of Republicans and Democrats on the Senate Intelligence Committee made a criminal referral to the Department of Justice. Of who? Don Jr., Jared Kushner, Steve Bannon, Eric Prince, and Sam Clovis, because that bipartisan committee of senators believed that those men may have lied under oath when they appeared before the Senate Intel Committee, so the Senate Intel Committee referred them for criminal investigation and possible prosecution. Here was the headline back in 2019 when that referral was made. Senate Committee made criminal referral of Trump Jr., Bannon, Kushner, two others to federal prosecutors. And of course, that was in July of 2019. And at that time, who was the Attorney General? Bill Barr. So Bill Barr's Department of Justice is where criminal referrals of Donald Trump's criminal associates and family members went to die. Because do you really think Bill Barr was going to approve prosecutions of Don Jr., Jared Kushner, Steve Bannon, and the others? Didn't happen, did it? No, those men were never charged. So that highlights the point that criminal referrals can be made by Congress, by the House, by the Senate. Even if they have the goods, they have enough evidence for DOJ to bring a criminal prosecution, does not guarantee DOJ will bring one. Let me finish with this, friends, and I'm going to finish on a positive note. The investigative team that has been running the January 6th Select Committee investigation into the insurrection is a team of former federal prosecutors. Now, obviously, the members of the J6 committee, the representatives themselves, have been actively involved in running this investigation. And, Bennie Thompson and Liz Cheney and Zoe Lofgren and Adam Kinzinger and Jamie Raskin and Adam Schiff. I don't mean to leave any of them out, but those are the members of Congress who have been on the panel investigating the insurrection. But behind the scenes, there's a whole investigative team of former federal prosecutors. The chief investigator is a gentleman named Tim Heaphy. There's a picture of him sitting right smack in the middle of the J6 panel at the last J6 committee public hearing. He has been heading up the investigative efforts. He and his team have been deciding who to subpoena, what questions to ask, how to grill the witnesses when they're under oath behind closed doors before the committee. And I am quite sure that they are hard at work right now putting together a report. We've been promised a report, friends. We've also recently been promised by the committee that the committee will release all transcripts. And boy, that's going to be an investigative reporter's Christmas. Or, that's going to be, I think, a really exciting moment when the American people will get to see all of these transcripts of all of these witnesses who testified about the insurrection. But there will also be a report that will pull it all together and distill it and give us the highlights, perhaps some of the lowlights. And that report, I'm quite sure, is being put together by this big team of federal prosecutors headed up by Tim Heaphy. I've mentioned in previous videos, Tim and I basically started as prosecutors together at the DC U.S. Attorney's Office, handling murder cases, RICO cases, and I will say Tim is perhaps one of the most accomplished RICO investigators and prosecutors DOJ has ever had. He's just that good. Don't tell him I said that. And so I have great confidence in the work they've done and in the report they will generate. And here's the thing. Prosecutors generate these kind of reports all the time. Now, they're obviously not congressional reports. They are what we call prosecution reports. We used to call them CIMs, case impression memos. And what we do in a CIM, when we're done the grand jury investigation, we put together an enormous report, soup to nuts, detailing all of the facts, all of the evidence, and the applicable law, and then we reach a conclusion about whether criminal charges should be brought, whether we should seek an indictment in the grand jury or not. A CIM, a prosecution report. I have a feeling, friends, what we're going to see when the J6 committee releases its report to the public is a big old CIM, case impression memo, a prosecution report. And it will leave no doubt, and it will leave the Department of Justice no alternative but to seek to hold accountable the people who committed crimes against the United States as part of the insurrection. And I have a feeling that's the way we're heading. So, as I say, these two legal developments are good ones for the rule of law, for the American people, and for justice. Because justice matters. Better days ahead, friends. Better days ahead. Please stay safe. Please stay tuned. And I look forward to talking with you all again tomorrow.